Yo, welcome back to the weekly recap with Justin and Ulam. This is a weekly series where I look over the previous week and summarize what we accomplished in the various series I'm playing. I'll give you some of my personal answers to the questions of the day that I asked, and finally I'll try to give you some idea of where I think we're going to be going with our series in the next week. With all of that out of the way, on with the show! In Coliseum this week, I found out about the clone case and about how I'll be able to use those to turn polka dollars into an amplification process for our purifying, which should prove very helpful in the purification process going forward. We also found out about the secret underground base that Cypher has underneath Pyrite, and we began our investigation into what all is going on there. In Golden Sun this week, we finally made our way to the very top of the Mercury Lighthouse, but by the time that we got there, we found that it was too late and that Felix and company had already relit the lighthouse, which meant that the power of Mercury was overflowing from it, which had some positives and negatives. On the downside, our first step on our mission from the Wise One has been failure, but on the other hand, while Saturos decided to fight us for a boss fight, because he is personally aligned with the Mars element, that overwhelming amount of Mercury actually made him very easy for us to defeat. Following his defeat, we went ahead and went down to the base and found that another benefit of reactivating that lighthouse was that the lighthouse now provides healing waters, both for the sick villagers of Emil and, as we used it, able to take a bottle of that water down to Trent, still getting that name wrong, probably will continue to get that name wrong, over in Colima Forest. And having healed him, we were able to find some new interesting things in Colima Village, now that those villagers have also been cured. The first question of the day from this week was asking what you thought the most frustrating Pokemon mechanic was. This was in reference to the fact that that was the episode where I was discovering and starting to experiment with how I could use the colognes in order to circumvent the mechanic that I was finding particularly annoying, the purification process, and as a subset, hyper mode. For my answer to that question, certainly from this game, clearly it would be the hyper mode, because I find that to be just absolutely annoying. But I think that from the main game's perspective, the single mechanic that I would consider to be my answer for the most frustrating would probably have to be Infatuation. It's got the same chance of immobilizing you as Confusion does, with the upside that whereas Confusion causes you to do some damage to yourself, immobilization due to Infatuation just basically treats you as if you had a turn of sleep, which isn't as bad, but unlike Confusion, you don't ever just break out of it, so you have to switch in order to avoid it. And the main reason that I find it the more frustrating, because everything I've said so far is kind of why it's kind of easier to deal with, and certainly more consistent to deal with, the big inconsistency with it that makes it to where anything that's negative about Confusion is a positive if you're the one using it. When it comes to Infatuation, it's not that much, it's not really any better than Confusion, and honestly, it's only more situational and harder to use. And it's that situational usage that, to me, makes it one of the more frustrating mechanics to deal with, because I almost never am prepared for it defensively, and offensively, I have no intention really ever of actively pursuing it, outside of maybe an individual battle where I know that it's going to be useful, because in general, that's just way too specific of a mechanic to be able to actually use. The next question was regarding summon rushes in Golden Sun, whether you think that it's wiser to prep for the summon rush by unsetting all the Jinn before the fight, or if it's better to leave them set and use those first couple of turns of battle using the Jinn so that you get their buffs and still get them set up for the summon rush, but in exchange you have to go a couple of turns of still taking boss attacks. I think for me, especially once you get some of the later ones, but honestly, as you saw in our fight this week, even now, I think that it's still wisest to, at least at a very minimum, go ahead and leave the defensive ones on and ready so that your very first turn can be used putting up those defensive barriers. Seeing as how whether you do a summon rush first turn or you start with the Jin the first turn, either way, you're going to want some defenses up because any of the boss battles in Golden Sun take a lot of turns, and especially after about the midway point of both games, you start seeing a lot of bosses that do multiple attacks per turn. And if you don't have defensive buffs up, that can outpace your healing really fast. So while you can sort of get a bit more damage by setting your Jin to unsetting your Jin ahead of time so that you can jump right into the damaging phase, I still feel that by and large that first turn or turns is still very worth it, if for nothing else, those defensive buffs. And occasionally some of the enemy bosses will carry status affecting moves that might affect your offensive stats, such that you may want to also go ahead and just use those couple of turns as well to use some of those offensive buffs as well. The next joke that I spoiled it a bit early. The next question that I asked for a question of the day was actually a joke about the song Down Under, because during the middle episode of our week in Coliseum, we found out about the area called The Under, and I also named the video joking about that song. So there wasn't actually any question about that one. I just thought I'd go ahead and point that out again just for continuity's sake. The very next question was about the moving overlay. When I was first trying to do the overlays for Golden Sun, I found that the particular icons that I was wanting to use for their overworld images, I had found as sprites, which included an entire set of them looking forward, turning their head, blinking, doing not much more animation than that, but basically their overworld animation. And I'd been looking forward right then, at the very beginning of the series, to being able to have an overlay with moving parts. Only to then find that actually getting that sort of thing imported into the video editor I'm using was a task and a half. So that's why the first half of this, well, probably once we finish this, I'll end up being basically the first quarter of this series or so. There is no movement, and even the last two that I've done, I use different methods to try to get it. So there are moving overlays for the most recent 2 Golden Sun episodes, and I'm still not satisfied with the method that I found to use it, or really the result, if we're being honest. So I'm still going to be tinkering with that and seeing if I can, in the future, get the overlay to have those moving parts while still not having to have a ton of backlog work that I have to do with every episode just to be able to make that happen, because if it's going to be a ton of work just to get a little bit of animation out of them every episode, that is not worth it. But if I can find some method, and I think I'm on the trail of finding a method that'll allow me to set something up that's just sort of an asset that I can throw in to every single project from this point forward, for this series anyway, then hopefully that'll reduce the workload enough that it'll make the value judgment, or the value difference, a lot more in favor of keeping the moving overlay. So again, I'll go ahead and pose the question, do you think it's particularly worth it at this point? Then the second to last was about second stage new element. I'm not remembering exactly how I phrased that one, but that was in reference to the fact that in our last video of this week, I suddenly, kind of out of nowhere, because I did the training off camera, added a Swablu to our Coliseum team, and had already evolved it into Altaria. And as I mentioned in the episode, the reason was absolutely not for the Swablu, because just normal flying was not really going to do us much help. But Altaria is, I think, absolutely at this point the earliest dragon type we can have, and even going forward should prove to be, it's not a powerhouse, and its stats are really not super bulky either, so it's not going to be, it is probably going to eventually be replaced, just FYI. But for right now and for quite a while, once we get this to level 40 and it gets a Dragon Dance ability to set up off of just a single turn of free, what was that phrasing? Off of a single free turn, then having the access to at least a moderately good dragon and a flying type is, I think, going to pay off enough compared to a lot of the other elements, because with this being Gen 3 and there being no fairy types, dragon is really poorly countered. So while we don't have just a ton of options for being able to always have something that's super effective against the enemy, if we have Altaria kept up to roughly the same level as everyone else, especially with Dragon Dance there, I feel that it'll be a good pinch hitter to be able to punch through walls that would otherwise require maybe an element that I might already have, but is someone who's like really low level and I don't want to bother with training them up. So the question was if what you thought would be another good Pokemon like Altaria, because Altaria just gains Dragon instead of its normal typing kind of out of nowhere when it evolves, and a Pokemon that I really feel could have used that treatment was Ambipom in Gen 4, because while it is a pretty cool evolution to gain a couple generations after Apom itself was introduced, it is a little bit disappointing that it remains just normal type, and so I'm not sure what secondary type I would give it, especially if I was just gonna go ahead and keep the design and everything else about it the same and just tack on another element so that it could get stabbed from another secondary element. But having anything other than just normal once it evolves would have been really nice, especially considering it's one of the Gen 4 moveset evolutions where you have to level it up while knowing a specific move in order to get it to evolve, and depending on whether or not you're breeding it, if you've just caught one in the wild, that can be kind of an annoying evolution method. And then the final question, as I kind of accidentally referenced in our summary of Golden Sun this week, was whether you think Trent or Tret is a better name. I'm not totally sure why I keep getting the correct one mixed up, which I do believe now is Tret. I think the reason I've been saying Trent and getting it confused is because putting that N in there would make the last part of it be Ent, which, considering he's a talking tree, I think that's what's getting me confused there, because otherwise Tret, the only real connection in English anyway, is that the first three letters are the first three letters of tree, and then there's just an extra T at the end. So, I mean, my personal answer is that, etymology-wise, I feel like Trent actually makes more sense as a name, but, to be fair, Tret is the official one, and I will continue to try to get that name correct, even if I may continue to mess that up, despite my trying. Looking forward to next week, in Pokemon Coliseum, I believe that we will probably be spending most of the rest of this week in the Under. From what I've read on the wiki, I think that 3 episodes should pretty much cover all of the story that I read, depending on how many trainers battles they end up putting in there. So I definitely don't think we'll be finishing it before this week. There is always the potential that this could end up being another Mount Battle situation, and even though plot-wise there should only be enough to sort of just go there and then get out and leave, there may be enough trainer battles there to make this take quite a while. So hopefully now that I know about where I can go to do some grinding off screen to make sure our Pokemon aren't so underleveled, hopefully we won't run into another Mount Battle situation, because I don't think that these areas are meant to take so long, because I think you're meant to be doing this training for each new area in between so that your whole team is more at level, ready to take them on, which should make the battles go a lot quicker. As for Golden Sun this next week, I believe that we'll be following the trail down as Tret and Laurel mentioned, into this haunted forest to the south of the river that comes out of their forest, which I don't remember from my playthrough before if there's any, story that goes on in there. I think that's mostly just a dungeon that should probably end up taking about one full episode to get through. And then on the other side of it, as we heard from that villager that traveling merchant that was in Colima Forest, there's another town down there that we will be heading to that I think will have some story with it. And between that haunted forest and then this next village beyond it, I think that will probably be covering most of what we accomplish in this next week. Well, that about wraps it up for this week. Thanks for watching this week's weekly review, and I will catch you next time. Yo! Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and leave a comment so I know you want more videos like this. If you want to know when new uploads arrive, subscribe and hit the bell icon to have YouTube send you a notification. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.